Arch, we are finally starting our draft talk. Isn't this exciting?
It is, and I can't believe it's a couple of weeks away. So we've got to get after it now. We got to start talking about these different position groups that potentially could impact the Falcons, but just talk about some of the top players in the draft as well.
Yeah, April means go time in terms of us talking about the NFL draft. It's what we're going to be talking about the next couple of weeks. We're going to be talking about all the different position groups. And today, we're going to start our draft preview with the defensive tackle. So, Arch, let's talk about a couple of these defensive tackles that we think are the best in this year's draft class. So let's start with Javon Kinlaw, the name who I think a lot of people are talking about now. I was at the Senior Bowl and I talked to Javon and I said, what type of player is an NFL team getting in you? And he goes, a bad man. And I just started laughing, but he was serious. He's huge. I was so struck by how big he was. And he kind of just seems like one of those guys who has a chip on his shoulder and really feels like he has something to prove. I know you've studied his tape, but he seems like a versatile guy who the Falcons would like to have in their defense, like a number of teams would, but he seems like he's only getting better with coaching and experience, given that he started playing football only in high school. He went to junior college and then on to South Carolina. So he's very much unproven to a lot.
Yeah, 6'5", 325 pounds. He does not look like a big body or a fat body. This guy is a sleek looking athlete in his uniform. He's a dominant run stopper, does an outstanding job against the run, which is where it's got to start, right? And he's continuing to work on his pass game. He's had 10 sacks over the last couple of seasons. So he's a developing pass rusher. So he has some of those abilities. Sometimes the one knock on Kinlaw, because he's 6'5", 325, plays a little bit too high. He's got to drop his pad level down a little bit, can get pushed off the spot from time to time. But he has a relentless motor, like a lot of these guys we're going to talk about. He is an intriguing guy. I don't know if he's going to be there at 16 when the Falcons are supposed to draft. Certainly Thomas has shown a penchant for going and getting the guy he likes. And certainly this guy would fit the bill right next to Grady Jarrett in that defensive front.
Yeah, and he's really one of those guys where I feel like every year there's a guy that you kind of root for, you know, a little bit about his backstory, whether what he's been through. I mean, Kinlaw is that guy this year. He grew up homeless in Washington, D.C. I read an article about how he used to just ride around on the metro just to skip school. He really didn't get serious about football until he went to junior college. And then, like you said, he's sleek. He actually lost 40 pounds in his sophomore year at South Carolina, and you can tell that really shows up on the tape.
No, think about that. He lost 40 pounds. He's 325 pounds. So
Whew.
he's a sleek monster athlete. Got an explosive first step. He's got the size we've talked about. So he fits the bill. I'm not sure he gets out of the top 10, but if he does slip out of the top 10, start looking, eyeballing him a little bit, because I know Thomas does a great job of going and getting guys when he wants them.
Is there a current player in the NFL that you would maybe compare his build or his game to?
Well, it's tough you don't see a lot of 6'5", 325-pound guys. Calais Campbell is a guy that comes to mind, who is a big-bodied guy that just has very good pass rush skills, can defend the run. We know Calais Campbell is now going to apply his wares up in Baltimore, having gone there as in a free agent deal. But he was an outstanding player in Arizona, had a decent year last year in Jacksonville, and so here he is now in Baltimore. But he's a guy that's a big-bodied guy that can play that way. The guy you got to be careful about applying these attributes to is a guy like Reggie White. Reggie White was an outstanding player. I had a chance to play with Reggie. He was 6'5", 300 pounds, cat quick, could play inside, outside. All these guys would aspire to be Reggie White, but he certainly has the body size.
Yeah, he's definitely a name that, of all the mock drafts I've read, I think that Kinlaw right now wins in terms of the player most mocked to the Falcons. But we'll see over these next couple of weeks if that stays the same, because he's certainly gaining a lot of attention. So let's switch to a guy who I think most think is the best defensive tackle in this year's draft class, in Derrick Brown out of Auburn. I mean, last year his name was one that started to come out a lot as someone to watch, and then he just tore it up at Auburn this year. 6'5", 326 pounds, a Georgia guy. So Georgia, people that live in the state of Georgia are familiar with his name. He went to Lanier High School. You know, he's really known for his pressure. He's not the biggest sack guy, but you watch his tape and he just takes over games. And I've been really impressed with the Falcons. Say they want to add game wreckers. Derrick Brown is a game wrecker on your defensive line.
Well, he's certainly a dominant run stopper. You see the athleticism that he possesses. This play here in particular was unbelievable. He strips the ball out of the hands of Trask, the quarterback, and then tries to high step and try to run for a touchdown. The guy's phenomenal in his athleticism, his sideline to sideline pursuit. He's got a relentless motor. He's a developing interior pass rusher, but what I like is he never takes a play off. He continues to play hard, even if the play goes away from him. And another thing that's impressive to me, Kelsey, about Derrick Brown is he was probably going to be a #1 draft pick a year ago, but might have been in the back half of the first round. He decided to come back to school, not necessarily to improve his draft stock, to get his degree. Believe me, that will resonate with GMs and personnel people, head coaches around the league. He had the commitment to go back and get his degree at Auburn, and he did improve his draft stock. Now he's probably considered a top 5 pick in the NFL draft this year.
So, Arch, I had a question for you about Derrick Brown. He really did not test well at the combine, and I know the game tape is the most important part of a draft evaluation, but do you think his poor test results at the combine will affect his draft stock?
I think it could, because this year, Kelsey, we don't have that secondary and then third check on a guy. You didn't have the pro day. You didn't have those 30 visits where you can bring in top players and talk to them and evaluate them on your own campus like most NFL teams like to do. So now you're basing it on the tape, and then you're basing it on the combine. So those third and fourth clips that you're going to get with the guy to confirm what you thought about him are gone. So now you've got to try to piece together some information that you don't necessarily have. This is where it's uncharted waters for both all the GMs, all the personnel guys trying to figure out how to really grade these guys. So it could hurt him some. I don't think he falls out of the top 10, and he may not fall out of the top 5.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the talent evaluators weigh the combine results and not having a pro day, because a couple of the guys like Kinlaw, they didn't even run at the combine. So it'll be interesting to see how they fit all of that in this process. But let's move on to a guy who we don't really talk about his conference that much, so his name might not be a name that Falcons fans would be that familiar with. But let's talk about Ross Blacklock, the defensive tackle out of TCU, 6'3", 290 pounds. He's probably the lightest defensive tackle we're going to talk about today, but just really athletic. His dad was a Hall of Fame basketball player at Texas, and then went on to be a part of the Harlem Globetrotters tour, which I think is really cool. But I mean, when you watch his tape, the athleticism jumps off. He seems like a player who, when I asked Dan Quinn at the combine what trait he values most when he's evaluating pass rushers, he said their quickness and their get off. And Ross Blacklock has that. It might be better than anyone in his position group at that.
Yeah, no question about it. I think that what jumps off the tape to you about Blacklock, again, like we talked about with these other two guys, and he'll continue to talk about it today, is the motor of these guys. They don't quit. Now, Blacklock was asked by Gary Patterson to 2-gap in their defense, meaning he was responsible for a gap on either side of the defender he was lined up on. He won't be asked to do that with the Falcons if he were drafted by the Atlanta Falcons. He's going to be a 1-gap penetrator, which I think will increase his value. He'll be a lot like Grady Jarrett is. Grady, an excellent 1-gap penetrator. And that's what Blacklock excels at. I think that his pass rush abilities are emerging, much like a lot of these guys that play the interior defensive line. Didn't have a ton of sacks last year. He did have a good number of tackles for a nose guard or a 2-gap player. He had 40-plus tackles as an interior defender for Gary Patterson's defense. But Blacklock, to me, is a guy that overcame a major injury, had an Achilles tendon tear in 2018, came back last year and was a dominant force inside. They didn't have much offense at TCU, but they continued to play very good defense, and he was a center part of that. So I like Blacklock. I think Blacklock has certainly emerged as a potential first-round draft pick. I think he certainly will be there at 16. I think he might even be there a little bit later in the first round. So if Thomas decided he wanted to kind of play around with things and move back and garner an extra pick and then still pick later, I think Blacklock's still available.
Yeah, you bring up that Achilles injury. He's also another guy like Kinlaw who lost 25 pounds. Kinlaw didn't lose it through an injury, but Blacklock did, and it actually worked out in his favor because it made him faster. And you could see it in his game tape. Everything I read about his play before the injury to after was that he was even better after the injury because he was lighter and able to get off the field more. So he's definitely a name that I think Falcons fans should familiarize themselves with over the next couple of weeks. Because like you said, if it's a situation where the Falcons say, hey, we want to move back and then acquire other picks, he could be someone that's there. So to finish our talk about defensive tackles, let's talk about the guy out of Oklahoma, Neville Gallimore. And he was probably, when I started doing my draft prep yesterday, the most interesting name I read and watched tape of, because he just seems like a guy who doesn't stop. His motor, you talked about Blacklock's motor. This guy seems like he's got more of a motor, and everything you read about him is that he will give you everything he has. And he's the Canadian guy. He was the top prospect out of Canada in 2015, and he seems like someone whose potential is only going to be so high. And he actually is insanely fast. He ran a 4.7, 4.8 seconds.
Yeah, 4.79 in the 40, Kelsey. He's a tremendous athlete. You couple that with he's got a 500 bench, and he squatted 800 pounds last year going into Oklahoma's his last year at OU. So this is a guy that much like, and I keep trying to compare him, and I do compare him to Grady Jarrett, is another guy that's a penetrator, a problem causer in the backfield. What disrupts blocking schemes up front more than anything else is penetration. And can you eat up one or two blocks, or can you get on an edge of a blocker and then create disruption for the quarterback in the backfield and or reroute the running back to where he's got to change direction which way he's going? Neville Gallimore epitomizes all that stuff. He did that for OU to a high degree this last season. Now, he's not a big sack number guy. And the one thing that sticks out to me when I watch the tape is that he's in the backfield a ton and then doesn't make the play. Now he does make a lot of plays, and so he's penetrating and creating disruption, but he got to finish. And those are some things as you continue to work towards being a consistent NFL player. Is you're in the backfield, you've made the play to get yourself. Now you got to finish the play, and I think that's probably the biggest area he needs to continue to improve on. But you like the fact that he's in the backfield to begin with, right? He's already back there. He's got the ability to do that. It's interesting because we keep kind of comparing these four guys to Grady Jarrett, at least I do. And think about Grady in his first couple seasons, how many times he penetrated in the backfield and missed the back, or he was back there and the quarterback got away. Grady's gotten better and better at finishing plays to the tune of what the season he had last year. Obviously a Pro Bowler this last season. I see that for some of these guys. Obviously the guy that anybody that's a little bit undersized, and you'd call the last two guys probably a little bit undersized, 290 for Blacklock, 300 for Neville Gallimore. Start talking about inside defensive linemen. The guy you point to and really the standard bearer is Geno Atkins, a guy that was drafted later in the draft, the fourth round out of Georgia. Yeah, 6'1", checked in at 300 pounds. All he did was all he's got is 75 sacks in his career and gone to the Pro Bowl 8 times. If you could find a diamond like that dude and plug him in, so that I think that's what everybody would aspire to. But I think Neville Gallimore is a guy that could jump into late in the first round. He could certainly be available in the second round. Blacklock is a similar type of guy. But these are four guys that I think have a chance to step in and play right away for whatever team takes them in the draft.
I really like how you brought up the comparisons to Grady Jarrett, because it kind of gives us all something in our head to picture when we look at these guys. And you talk about how they could fit in the Falcons defense and other NFL defense. So I love it. So before we go, I got to ask you, of all these guys, who's your favorite?
If I could take any of them, I would probably take Javon Kinlaw. I think I take Kinlaw out of the three. I don't think Kinlaw and Brown are going to be available later on in the draft, but when we're picking, so it might take a little bit of jockeying by Thomas and his staff. But I do love Javon Kinlaw. I like his story, his hard-fought story to get where he is, like you talked about, what he's had to go through to get here. That's no shade on Derrick Brown, though. I think Derrick Brown, his ability to go back, get his degree, improve his stock has helped him some as well. One sleeper I'll give you, Kelsey, a late round sleeper, just to throw it out there. Bravion Roy, defensive tackle, Baylor. Okay, 6'1", 333 pounds. He is a pure one technique guy, so it allows Grady to get out in that three technique. But he is a monster in the middle, was outstanding for Baylor in their very good defense for Matt Rule a year ago. That's a sleeper for you. Bravion Roy out of Baylor.
I really like Blacklock. The more I read and the more I watched him, and I just like the potential of what he could be. And you talk about stories. He just seems like a guy whose story hasn't even been written yet. I like how athletic he is. And I say that because I don't know if the Falcons will go with a defensive lineman in the first round, but if they do go corner or another position with that number 16 overall pick, if this guy's available in the second round, I would be dancing of excitement because I think he could be that good for the Falcons. So he's my favorite. I mean, obviously, Kinlaw, Derrick Brown, those guys are going to be day one starters, but I just really like Blacklock, and he's someone who I'm glad that we had this conversation because I'm definitely going to be talking about him more.
Yeah, I think he's an excellent choice. Like I said, a two-gap guy that he'd be a one-gap penetrator. He'd be a monster here. He's got a great motor. And then him being able to overcome the injury that we talked about, the Achilles tendon injury. Little concern there whenever a guy has an injury in college is significant like that, but he had a standing year last year for TCU and Gary Patterson. So I think that the arrow's pointing up for Ross Blacklock.
Mm-hmm. And the Falcons do have the number 16 overall pick, and they have 6 picks in this year's draft for right now. We know Thomas can, do some things on draft day. So we say for right now because we have to. But that is it for us in talking about the defensive tackles today. We will be back on Wednesday to hit the running backs with you guys, and we're just getting started.